Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to tonight's video. Gordon Causey, as always, live right now. If you're watching it later, thank you. It's right now 10:50 p.m. and the date is the 21st of November. It's Tuesday night. And, Candy the Wonder Pup has been outside and it's raining, so she's all nice and wet. All right. So you get to watch me clean off my dog. Sorry about that. And we'll do the usual sit. Sit. Come here, Paw. Lay down. Speak. Come on. Now. There, hopefully that'll keep her quiet. Hopefully she doesn't find something to chew on and interrupt things, as she is wont to do on occasion. As always, thank you to everyone who has subscribed to my channel. For the comments that come up, I try to respond to them all now, and for likes, for giving me that little endorphin rush for this. As I always say, my miserable, pathetic little YouTube channel, non-monetized, just putting my voice out there. And tonight I'm going to be reading from Scripture, from the Bible. Got it here. And I'm going to be reading what is likely in my lifetime, in my experience, the most sermonized passage in the Bible. As I say, in my lifetime, I think I've heard more sermons on this passage, which is Luke chapter 15, verse 11 to verse 32, which is the end of the chapter. And it's the parable of the prodigal son. And even non-Christians many non-Christians are familiar with it. And I would simply ask, as if you're going to listen to this, if you try and listen to it with new ears, you'll hear that sometimes in church. Because the one thing about God's word is it doesn't change. It does not change. It is always the same. Another famous parable is that of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan who a traveler is beat up and left to die at the side of the road, and it's a Samaritan, someone who's ritually unclean, the lowest of the low in Judea of Jesus's time. And the story never changes. One of the Levitical priests doesn't stop. If you read it a second time, it doesn't change. One of the Levitical priests doesn't stop and help the wounded man. You read it again, the Samaritan doesn't walk by. It always is the same. But we change. People change. Our perspectives change. The condition of our heart changes. There are times in our life when we're hot. There are times in our lives when we're cold. There are times in our lives when we're all in believing. There are times in our life that are challenging and full of doubts, but the word stays the same. And so that's why I ask you to listen, try and listen to this with new ears, like you're hearing it for the first time as much as you're able. So this is the parable of the prodigal son. Starts chapter 15 of Luke, starting in verse 11. Jesus is speaking. And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that falls to me. And he divided his living between them. Not many days later, the young man gathered all he had and took his journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in loose living. And when he had spent everything, a great famine arose in that country, and he began to be in want. So he went and joined himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his field to feed swine. And he would gladly have fed on the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to eat, have bread enough and to spare, but I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." And he arose and went to his father. But while he was yet at a distance, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to make merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what this meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him safe and sound." But he, the brother, was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, "Lo, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your living with harlots, you kill for him the fatted calf?" And the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to make merry and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." Thus ends the reading of the word. Thanks be to God. I'm looking at this passage now in light of the situation in Israel, the war that's raging between the nation state of Israel and Hamas and the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. And it is horrendous. And what I am hearing, though, on it distresses me. I am hearing hatred towards Israel, hatred toward Jews, and I'm going to get into that. I don't want this to go on too long, but it's a difficult issue, and I think many Christians, many professing Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, to take a page from the parable of the prodigal son, are approaching things in the manner of the elder brother, who is annoyed, angry, vexed with his younger brother, and is wasting his money, all his father's money. He took half the inheritance and blew it on loose living. The elder son, harlots, on prostitutes. Hardly worthy. And yet the father extends to his younger son, fallen and woe-begotten as he is, he extends to him grace. And grace is something, I think it's just a natural part of human nature, a human inclination, that we want to merit that which we get. If something's given to us, we want it to be on merit. And Oh, do we ever get our nose out of joint when we see someone getting something that they did not receive on merit? However, Christians should know that we've been given the greatest gift of all, life everlasting, and it was not on merit. We did nothing to earn it. Now, in terms of the situation in Israel and what is happening right now, many who have embraced this theology of supersessionism, which says that the church has taken the place of Israel as God's chosen, and that the covenant, which was said to be for forever, was to be everlasting. People will say, well, it doesn't apply anymore. They've fallen too far. The Israel of today has no connection to the Israel of the Bible. And I did a video on this earlier on chapter 11 of Romans. And I won't read the whole chapter again as I did in that video, just chapter 11, starting in verse 11. This is the Apostle Paul speaking, a man who knows grace, because Paul was a persecutor of the very early church. He was on his way to Damascus and in hopes of finding Christians so that he could take them back bound to Jerusalem to be punished by the religious authorities there. And that's where he met the risen Christ and was given his commission by Jesus. So Paul is a contemporary of Jesus Christ. Paul walked, when Paul was walking the earth for his first 30 some odd years, Jesus and Paul were walking the earth at the same time. I think it's the Apostle Stephen when he was stoned to death, when the religious leaders in Jerusalem murdered Stephen for professing Jesus as the Christ, as the Messiah. He was stoned, and Paul was there, and Paul stood over and watched the coats. Said, throw your jackets down, throw your coats down. I got your back. Go kill the guy. I'm good with it. And this is the individual to whom grace was received. That's an important message. Chapter 11, verse 11 of Romans, Paul is asking, so I ask, have they, meaning Israel, or the Jews, have they stumbled so as to fall? And then he answers his own question, by no means. But through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Future tense of the verb. How much more will their full inclusion mean? It's not saying how much would it have meant, how much might it have meant. So how much more will their full inclusion mean? Remember that Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega. God knows the beginning and the end. And when we read his inspired word, Israel will come to know Jesus. Will everyone? In Revelation, Jesus says there are Jews who say they are Jews but are not. There are Jews who are Jews, and there are Jews who say they are Jews but they are not. Am I capable of saying which ones qualify? No, I'm not. God has extended to me grace. I have to extend grace likewise. Now, in terms of the conflict going on right now between Israel and Hamas, and the people in the Gaza Strip, a lot of individuals who are taking the side of the Palestinians have bought into this notion that Israel more or less stole the land, that they're occupiers of this territory, of this land, and that that the Palestinian population is indigenous to it. And that's not, historically, that's not true. The Palestinians are often alternately called Arabs. Arabs come from Arabia. Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation, to whom this promise of an everlasting covenant that went through Isaac and then Jacob, came from Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq. They're not indigenous to this little strip of land in what, prior to Joshua leading the nation of Israel across the Jordan River, prior to that, it was the land of Canaan. And there were, I can't remember, Edomites, Hittites, Jebusites, thisites, thatites, Canaanites, all collectively Canaanites. And they were the ones who were dispossessed of the land. For roughly 500 years prior, from 1918, the end of World War I, and go back for about 500 years, and the land at that time was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. It was theirs to do with as they wished. The Sultan overseeing this southern district of Syria could administer it as he saw fit. Then, after the end of World War I, the British were given the mandate over this land. It was their territory to do with as they saw fit. It was actually bigger than the actual area that we look at now. In 1918, they had a larger territory. That was part of their mandate. It was the British mandate for Palestine. However, the formal mandate wasn't recognized by the League of Nations until 1922. The League of Nations is the precursor to the United Nations. And the French and the British had basically carved up the Middle East, and it was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And Britain was given a large chunk of land that included what is now Jordan, and it was theirs to administer. And in 1921, they had already carved off a section of it. Before the British mandate was formally recognized by the League of Nations, Britain was still managing it. It was theirs. It was theirs to administer. And Winston Churchill in Cairo, carved off a section of it called the Transjordan. And he said, here, we'll create a country called Transjordan. And this was for the Hashemites, who had been the rulers of the Arabian Peninsula. They had ruled that territory when it was the Ottoman Empire. It was under the rule of the Hashemites. And the Hashemites had allied with Great Britain to fight against the Turks, against the Ottoman Turks, almost an internal conflict within the Ottoman Empire itself, because the Arabians didn't like being ruled by the Turks. The Turks are not Arabs. And so, to recompense the Hashemite king and his followers for having fought against the Ottoman Turks, Winston Churchill in 1928 took this territory that they had been given to administer, this British mandate for Palestine, and they carved out a section of it, and they said, there, we've created a new country called Transjordan. The name was later shortened to simply Jordan. You can look that up yourself. Um, I may not be everything I've said is true. I may not have every minute detail. I'm sure there's a lot more to it. But in broad strokes, that is exactly what happened. Stroke of a pen, and then then 1922 rolls around, and the League of Nations formally recognizes what the remaining part of that territory as the British Mandate for Palestine. Had they not signed off that portion to Transjordan, it would have been bigger. And then they wanted to create, they're the landlord in a manner of speaking. And they said, okay, we're going to create two nations. We're going to create a Jewish nation state, which is something we committed to do in 1917 with our Balfour Declaration. And I'm going to get to that too. In 1917, we anticipated taking control of this area, and we had stated to the Lord Rothschild, a leading member of the Jewish community and a Zionist, that we would employ best efforts towards creating a Jewish nation state in this area of the southern district of Syria, of the old Ottoman Empire, what would soon be the old Ottoman Empire. And so they were fulfilling that commitment. And some will say, well, Lord Rothschild, he's not Jewish. He's just a Zionist, and he's evil, and he's a Satan worshiper, and you'll hear all manner of things. I would ask you to look at it from this perspective. At the end of hostilities in World War II, when the Nazis had been defeated and Jews had been liberated from those who had survived the concentration camps like Auschwitz, like Dachau, like Treblinka, like Baden-Baden. I'm not sure I have all the names right. No, Baden-Baden was one. There were too many. But Auschwitz, Dachau, Treblinka, those are three big ones, and countless others. The Jews who had survived that horror, 6 million of them didn't. But those who had survived were now dispossessed of basically everything. And I believe it was the World Jewish Congress who called upon every able-bodied displaced Jew, anyone who could, to go to the land of Israel, to go to what was then British mandated Palestine. Where else were they going to go? Do you think they cared if the British had gained control of it and had committed to employing best efforts to create a Jewish nation state? Do you think they cared that deal, that the letter, that the declaration that they made, that it was delivered to Lord Rothschild? You just survived goodness knows how many months or years in a concentration camp, forced labor, people gassed, people killed. Watch the old newsreels of the footage of the Allied forces liberating these camps and look at the skeletal remains that are the people. These were walking skeletons. And many of them came to Israel, to what the Bible, what the Torah calls the promised land, the land of their inheritance, the land that God had chosen out for them. I don't even think they just wanted a place to go to be safe. The persecution that happened, the Holocaust was the climax, but it had gone on for centuries before that. Hitler had justified his pogroms and his final solution against European Jewry by invoking the teachings of people like Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Ignatius of Antioch. And the persecution suffered by Jews in Nazi Germany had a long documented history. And so they made their way to the land of Israel. It wouldn't become Israel until May 14th, 1948. And that's when the British had given up. The British had tried to negotiate the creation of a two-state solution, a state of Palestine. This is their territory, and they said, okay, here's how we're going to divide it up. This will be Israel, this will be Palestine. And the Arab nations or the Islamic nations around them always said no to every single proposal put forward. And so, almost like Pontius Pilate, the Brits washed their hands and said, all right, to the UN, you deal with it. You figure this out, because we give up. And so the UN tried to handle it, and they put forth proposals. There's one that gets shared a lot in social media, and the UN drew up a map that proposed a division, and it's largely the one that Israel adopted when they finally declared their independence on May 14th, 1948. They went with pretty close, if not bang on, to a 1947 proposal that had been put forth by the UN. But now that map, that proposed map, gets put out on social media posts, and it says Palestine on it. And people say, see, it was Palestine. Well, that was a proposed map. And if you read it, if you bother to take the time to read the small print, you'll see that this was a proposal put forth by the UN, and that was rejected by the Arab population, Muslim population that was living in British-mandated Palestine. Israel was willing to say, whatever you give us, we'll take it. You want to have, separated here, there, fine, we'll take it. Good. But every proposal put forward was rejected. This was British territory. Prior to British territory, it was Ottoman territory. And then the Brits had handed it over to the UN. It was never the Palestinians' land in the modern sense of the word. And so on May 14th, 1948, Israel unilaterally declared itself an independent nation state, and immediately, without any military assistance from Britain, France, the United Kingdom, they were on their own. They were invaded by 5 nations of what was called the Arab League, and I don't think anyone expected them to survive, but they did. And they survived again in 1967 when they were attacked, again in 1973 when they were attacked. These I can't even pronounce it, intifadas, these uprisings. They've survived all of those. Rocket fire from Lebanon. This most recent attack from Gaza on October 7th. And how is Israel supposed to respond? If you look up Hamas and the covenant of Hamas, there's a word Christians should know, covenant. Hamas has a covenant. It's from whence that saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It's in their covenant. And it calls for the eradication, the elimination of the Jewish nation state of Israel. They don't want a peaceful two-state solution. They want Israel gone. And I'm here to say Israel's not going anywhere. Now, it's difficult in today's world where having You don't have to have a military background to know that propaganda is to be expected during times of war. In World War One, the media, Western media, in particular the American media, before the U.S. joined that war, the press started putting out stories, reports of the horrible Huns. The Germans were called the Huns, Huns, conjuring up images of Attila the Hun. They were given the name on purpose. And the claim was that German soldiers were cutting the hands, amputating the hands off of Belgian children. Was it true? No. But can you imagine? It's in the newspaper. And can you imagine questioning that back, say, in 1916, 1917, and saying, oh, how do we know this is true? Oh, you imagine the backlash that someone would confront if they dared to question, if they dared to be skeptical of the news being reported at that time. And I would submit it's no different today. I just read a CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, news article. And in it, they had a picture of a young girl, looks to be Palestinian, although I'm imagining she could have been from anywhere in the world. And she was bandaged up, and there's no real context to it. It was just part of the article talking about the heavy bombardment and such. And then you have this image of a young injured girl with her head bandaged. Images are powerful weapons. A picture's worth a thousand words. But is the picture legitimate? I don't know. I don't know where CBC News got that picture. Did they have their own reporter in Gaza taking the picture? Did they get it off of a wire service? Did it? You have no idea. And we know that CBC News, if you've lived during the COVID era, you know that CBC News has lied. CBC News in Edmonton, they had to apologize to their consumers of the news because they had gone to air with a false picture. As they were reporting on the COVID numbers, they had shown an image in behind the reporters of a patient hooked up to a ventilator in an intensive care unit. And they put that out there, and people would watch that, people who bought into everything that was said during the COVID era. And they said, see, look, this is what could happen to you. But some eagle-eyed viewers of the news looked and they went, that's not a human being. That's a mannequin. That's why are they showing a mannequin hooked up to a ventilator in an ICU? And that was a case of unethical journalism. And proof of that is the fact that the director of CBC News Edmonton was forced to apologize. And he came out later and he said that they had made a mistake and that it was an error in judgment. Pardon me for saying this, I'm not one who's given to profanity, not one given to gratuitous profanity, but sometimes it fits. And this is one of those cases I call bullshit. The director of CBC News Edmonton and the people working for him, they knew exactly what they were doing. If they wanted to be ethical, they would have said, the following image that we are displaying depicts a mannequin hooked up to a ventilator in an ICU unit. This is not a real patient. We are merely showing you this image to give a depiction of what an actual patient's patient would look like. However, this is a mannequin. That would be ethical. It was completely unethical to put it out there without any form of disclaimer. And I don't think CBC News is any worse than any other news outlet out there. If the image plays to the emotional response they're looking to elicit, they'll go with it, whether it's accurate or not. And so you have to be incredibly circumspect with what you're seeing and with what you're sharing. Because images are powerful. People like to think that I'm a critical thinker and I base my opinions and such on genuine factual data and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, we are emotional creatures. And if you can hit someone's emotions, that shuts off the capacity for critical thinking. And images of children, like this young girl in this picture in the CBC News article. I saw another one just recently, just within the last hour or so. Showed a bunch of babies. They look like they might be premature, being laid out in what looks like one of those little beds or something. And again, it's just a video. No context whatsoever. You can hear a bit of chatter in the background. Might be Arabic. For all I know, it could be Urdu or Hindi or goodness knows what language it is. I'll assume it's Arabic. Maybe a dialect thereof. I don't know. Don't know what they're saying. What's the context? No idea. But with everything going on right now, and there being so many reports out of premature children in Gaza, in the hospitals there, people will make a quick connection, a leap of faith, and they'll just assume. And the emotional heartstrings start getting pulled, and then the capacity for critical thinking goes out. But what do you do if you're Israel? 1,400, well, I forget the number. I think it's 12. I thought it was 14, but I think now it's 12. 1,200 of Israel's citizens were murdered on October 7th during a horrendous attack from the Gaza Strip by Hamas. Thousands of rockets, the border fence broken down by heavy machinery, and then hundreds, maybe thousands of Hamas fighters storming into kibbutzes, dance parties, killing indiscriminately, dragging back. The number I'm hearing most now is 240 men, women, and children dragged back in to the Gaza Strip to be held as hostages. Some of them have died. And this was an act perpetrated by a group that denies your very right to exist, denies Israel's right to exist, wants Israel wiped off the map. And how do you respond? How do you respond? Do you attack until roughly 1,400 people have died, and then say, okay, we'll wait, we'll stop, and we'll wait for it to happen again, and then we'll retaliate again? What it appears as though Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, is committed to eliminating Hamas as a threat, eliminating their capacity to commit attacks on Israel, and maybe even to eradicate Hamas from existence. It's not I think Hamas was elected. I think it was back all the way in 2006. A great example of democracy. 17 years between elections. There are, if you're a Palestinian, if you're of Arab descent, you're not Canaanite, you're from, if your ancestors, if your lineage comes from Saudi, or what is now Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, then you're an Arab. And Arabs have full citizenship rights in Israel. They vote, they have political parties. Name a part of the Islamic world where Jews enjoy the same ability, where there are Jewish parties in Iran or Iraq or Yemen or Saudi, or, anyway. Grace. Israel's not perfect. Hamas is not perfect. Canada is not perfect. Britain, the UK, Germany, the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium. There are no perfect countries out there. But we all want to be the older brother. And, now they're cut off. They don't get to participate in God's saving message of grace. Doesn't apply to them, only to us. We've replaced them. There's one last passage I'll read, and it's also in Luke. I can get to it. And it's chapter 23, verse 34. I didn't have it bookmarked. It's the crucifixion. 2 others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him, with Jesus. And when they came to the place which is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and one on the left. And Jesus said, "Forgive them, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus was forgiving those who crucified him. Talk about grace. Is Israel reacting perfectly? I don't know how I would react. Personalize it. If your family had seen a significant number of members killed, dragged away as hostages by a group that denies your entire family's right to exist, how do you respond? I'll leave it at that. God bless. Thank you for watching. If you want to leave a comment, please do. And ultimately pray for peace. There's talk that there's going to be a protracted pause. Some outlets are referring to it as a ceasefire. I don't think that's the proper term. I've even seen the word truce, and I don't think that's the proper term either. I think the proper term is a pause. They're talking about having a 4 to 5 day pause, which would facilitate the exchange of Palestinians who are held in Israeli jails. I've heard the number 150. In exchange for 50 of the Israelis, predominantly, if not all, women and children who were taken hostage. So 150 Palestinians would be released from Israeli jails. I believe it's also predominantly women and children. And that Hamas would then likewise release 50 women and children that they've held as hostage, and that during this pause that there would be influx of humanitarian aid, food, water, fuel, medicine, would it would allow for the Gaza Strip to be supplied with humanitarian aid. I pray it does come to pass. I pray that the Israelis being held hostage are released. The Palestinian women, if there are Palestinian women and children being held in prison, children in particular, but women as well. There, there are no good guys in war, and it's difficult. It's difficult. I'll end it there. I can go on forever. We'll talk to you again. Thanks again for watching. And again, if you want to like, share, subscribe, comment, I'll try and respond. All I ask is that you be, I think my tone is pretty respectful. That's all I ask. Is, don't be invective. Don't be combative. If we want to discuss. God bless. We'll talk again soon.